Welcome to Design a Custom Performance Max Pipeline. I'm your host, Devin Chasanoff. I've got a special session lined up for you, during which I'll show you how to design and build your own custom Performance Max interface and pipeline. Let's start by outlining some goals for the session. First, if nothing else, this session will reinforce and tie together various Performance Max concepts. Second, I want you to understand various design considerations to factor into your implementation. If you haven't started development yet, this will be extremely beneficial to your planning, and if you have, perhaps this will give you some ideas to refactor your existing code. Third, I want to reinforce concepts around what constitutes a valid serving Performance Max campaign, so that you can get your campaigns up and running more quickly and with fewer errors. Finally, I want to provide a model demonstrating best practices that you can follow in building your integration. In order to achieve these objectives, I'm going to walk you through a small application I created that uses a simple JSON file to create a Performance Max campaign, or rather, to create one or more Performance Max campaigns. I'll be showing code on the screen, but I may move through it quickly, and I won't be explaining every line. You can always pause the video and go back, but for today, I want you to focus on design decisions and application flow, which is where I'll be focusing. You can think of this as an exercise in applied system design that implements a PMax specific interface or a shim layer on top of the existing Google Ads API. We'll start with an asset upload pipeline, which is almost like a separate pipeline altogether. We suggest uploading assets in separate requests from those that create the actual Performance Max campaign. More broadly, we recommend uploading assets that may be used in PMax campaigns to your Google Ads asset library, then selecting a subset of those assets from your library in the campaign creation process. That's not to say you can't upload assets and add them to an asset group in the same request. In fact, I'll show you how to do just that. However, uploading the assets ahead of time can simplify the campaign creation process and set you up to leverage Google AI's ability to automatically create assets in your account that you can use in your asset groups. While I'm not going to be overly prescriptive on this point, there's a lot going on in the world of AI and generative assets with new advancements every day. It's wise to set up your infrastructure in a flexible way that can leverage future capabilities. The next part of our pipeline is campaign input generation. With the exception of asset selection, this part will largely be your job, because this step is effectively choosing the inputs for your campaign, and that's dependent on your business goals, campaign objectives, and your infrastructure. However, I will walk you through a suggested process for selecting assets that meet required specifications. More on this later. Once we know our inputs, or have a process for choosing them, we'll create what I'm calling a flattened schema. And you can think of this schema, which I'll be showing in JSON, as our PMax specific interface. This schema simplifies many of the concepts related to PMax by clearly modeling the campaign structure, removing configuration options that pertain to other campaign types, and assuming the configuration options required for a PMax campaign specifically are a given. As I'll demonstrate, you can also create your own custom configuration options for enhanced flexibility. One of the things I love about this approach is that it provides you a consolidated view of your entire PMax campaign that's really easy to understand. It also makes it much easier to validate your campaign, which is a great segue into our next process. While you could theoretically skip this step, I would highly recommend you build something like this into your PMax management pipeline. By doing so, you'll submit fewer failed requests. More importantly, with client-side validation and error handling, you can more clearly understand errors in your PMax campaign that are easy to fix. You can even build a mechanism to address these errors into your pipeline so you can create a PMax campaign incrementally, only submitting it once your campaign is valid. The next step in our pipeline is request pre-processing. In doing so, we'll create an expanded version of our schema that more closely resembles the resources you'll actually be submitting to the Google Ads server. In addition, we'll populate our schema with the temporary resource names needed to submit bulk mutate requests. And in my experience, it's much easier to do this in a pre-processing step than it is when actually constructing the resources. With our expanded schema in place, we'll move on to operation construction. This step will look really familiar if you've reviewed our code examples. However, the approach I'll be walking through is a bit simpler because of the pre-processing, which also adds a bit of modularity. Finally, you can submit your request. And I want to point out that the approach we're taking affords us a bit of flexibility, so it should work in a variety of environments. You can submit requests one at a time in real time as you create each individual campaign. You can create a queue of operations, then submit them in bulk using a scheduled job or some sort of similar mechanism. Or if your infrastructure is sophisticated enough to populate the inputs of your flattened schema automatically from our earlier step, then you can automatically create and manage campaigns at a large scale, which presents some really exciting opportunities. In fact, that's one of the things I hope you get out of this talk. If we can systematize the mechanics of creating PMax campaigns, you can focus on more creative endeavors like creating campaigns or developing an automated system to accomplish just that. Once we're done reviewing the campaign creation pipeline, we'll shift our focus to campaign management with a specific focus on retrieving data about your campaigns and making updates. This will build on many of the lessons from the campaign creation process, such as structuring the data provided by the API. We'll also cover some of the major differences to consider when performing updates as compared with initial campaign creation. That's a lot to go through, and I'm really excited to share all of this with you. Let's get started. I'm going to skip the uploading assets part of our pipeline because that process is fairly straightforward if you're familiar with the API already. If you take anything away from this section, it's just what I said before. Upload assets that you may want to use in PMax campaigns ahead of time, and then select assets to include in your campaign later in the process.